demande qui est inscrite dans le compte-rendu et les conclusions du sommet de Malte, et donc, qui chargeait l'IEMed et avec les autres collègues d'organiser ce réseau. Nous l'avons fait et donc voilà que depuis quelques années, nous avons tous ensemble travaillé pour, disons, fournir, je vais dire, à nos gouvernements, parce que traditionnellement le 5+5 était et reste toujours un exercice plutôt intergouvernemental, mais il manquait cette dimension de réflexion qui n'est pas rattachée aux aléas politiques du moment et qui n'est pas rattachée aux besoins d'action directe à chaque instant qui presse tout le gouvernement, soucieux de soigner les thèmes importants pour son pays et de se nourrir aussi de la réflexion un peu plus académique, un peu plus en profondeur peut-être, plus à longue échéance. Et donc, voilà que notre réseau, avec quarantaine presque d'instituts, s'est constitué et que ça vient travaille depuis quelques années d'une manière, je trouve, très effective et d'accord aux avis que je reçois de nos gouvernements d'une manière très positive. Alors donc, je remercie à tous nos participants invités pour aujourd'hui. Nous avons un panel extraordinaire pour traiter du thème, comme vous le savez, From Crisis to Recovery in Western Mediterranean, Challenges and Opportunities on the Road to Post-COVID-19 Sustainable Growth. Vous savez que vous avez traduction en français et anglais, alors donc les participants peuvent s'exprimer soit en anglais, soit en français, et nos écouteurs peuvent aussi passer à la langue originelle dans laquelle le speech est délivré ou changer à l'autre langue entre anglais et français à sa convenience. Il faut dire tout d'abord que cette occasion, c'est une occasion heureuse puisque nous pouvons nous rencontrer, mais c'est une occasion un peu manquée aussi parce que ça aurait dû être un grand événement présentiel au Maroc avec nos amis marocains et donc nous avons dû le faire d'une manière non présentielle, online. Alors, je disais auparavant à nos speakers que ce qui manque online, c'est qu'il n'y a pas de couloir. Alors, donc, il n'y a pas manière de parler, sauf en se dirigeant à tous, ce qui est bien, mais il nous manque cette autre dimension, un peu plus préparer les plats avant de les sortir à la grande salle à manger. Et donc, les petits accords qui se tissent avec l'amitié des participants au séminaire, au congrès, aux conférences, nous manquent un peu aujourd'hui. Mais puisque c'est une rencontre aussi avec des amis de vieille date avec qui nous avons travaillé depuis de longues années, je pense qu'il y a cette entente implicite qui peut nous aider dans cette réflexion commune que nous allons entamer aujourd'hui. Bon, le thème qui nous regroupe aujourd'hui, nous sommes aussi à une date spécialement intéressante, hein, parce que notre mission, c'est de voir comment on peut transformer cette crise à une opportunité. Toute crise, comme, si nous avons pris les leçons que nous donnerait Joseph Schumpeter, il faut que les choses changent et que surtout les nouvelles technologies nous offrent de grandes possibilités pour que d'autres secteurs prennent la relève. Alors, cette occasion-ci, malheureusement, c'est aussi le virus qui nous a forcé à faire évoluer le secteur économique et que beaucoup d'activités ont disparu pendant quelque temps. Quelques-unes ne seront même pas capables de continuer après. Et donc, quand nous reviendrons à la normalité, peut-être, et dans une large mesure, c'est désirable, nous n'allons pas revenir à la même normalité qu'auparavant. Nous allons revenir à une normalité nouvelle, en fait. Et et donc, il faut que nous soyons capables de revenir à une normalité meilleure que celle d'auparavant. Une normalité qui profite de toutes les opportunités que nous offrent les nouvelles technologies. J'avoue que pour des gens, tout au moins de ma génération, les technologies étaient là, mais nous n'étions pas habitués comme nos enfants que l'utilisation des nouvelles technologies pour eux, ça fait partie de sa nature. Et on a une grande agilité innée, paraît-il, non? Nous avons dû découvrir pendant cette période de crise les possibilités que les nouvelles technologies nous offrent pour des webinaires, etc., à part, évidemment, l'apprentissage que beaucoup d'entrepreneurs et beaucoup d'autres gens des secteurs productifs ont été capables d'introduire. Et donc, je pense qu'effectivement, il faut que nous soyons en mesure de mettre à profit la crise que nous avons subie et que nous a fait même souffrir énormément parce que nous avons perdu beaucoup d'amis, de gens, même peut-être de la famille, etc., pendant cette période de maladie et de crise. Pourtant, il faut le prendre comme il est et tirer profit de cette crise pour la transformer, comme je disais, en une opportunité. Voilà donc ce qui est le fond de l'objet de notre démarche aujourd'hui. Nous avons vu d'ailleurs que les gouvernements ont pris des mesures à court terme pour faire face à l'épidémie, mais ils ont préparé aussi des plans à tous les niveaux. Nous l'avons vu en Europe, les plans préparés par la Commission européenne et pour le Conseil européen. C'est un plan extraordinaire qui non seulement est capable de faire face à la situation de crise et préparer la reprise, mais aussi est capable de faire que l'Union européenne soit en mesure de faire un grand saut en avant dans la nature même de la démarche de l'unification européenne, puisque pour la première fois, nous serons en mesure d'émettre des bons européens par la Commission, ce qui entraînera par la suite un plus grand budget européen qui devra donc être en mesure de faire face aux échéances dans les années à venir pour payer le grand endettement que nous devrons encourir pendant cette période de reprise de la crise. Et donc, il faut que ces moyens soient utilisés de la meilleure façon pour que cette transformation de nos structures économiques ait place, c'est-à-dire non seulement pour financer le coût social de la crise, ce qui est extrêmement important, évidemment, et est en train de se faire, mais aussi pour financer surtout pendant les tout prochaines années à venir, que la reprise soit faite dans des projets et dans des secteurs de futur, et dans des secteurs porteurs, et dans des secteurs qui puissent nous engager dans cette développement durable. Nous savons maintenant, avec l'agenda 2030, quels sont les objectifs. Nous savons à peu près quelles sont les mesures au niveau théorique. Maintenant, il faut l'introduire dans les politiques appliquées dans les différents pays. Et donc, voilà, donc, nous sommes conviés à ajouter notre réflexion pour que ce réseau de Medthink 5+5 soit utile à nos pays, ça veut dire à nos gouvernements. Je sais que nous avons des représentants des différents ministères qui sont branchés sur nous. Je le dis même au sens le plus strictement réel, parce que j'ai vu dans la liste des gens qui se sont enregistrés pour suivre nos débats qu'il y a des représentants qui suivent les thèmes de Méditerranée occidentale dans nos ministères. Je salue mes grands frères du ministère espagnol, aussi du ministère marocain. Et donc, nous allons commencer. Nous avons pour cela aujourd'hui quelques keynote speech et puis dans un round table avec de grands experts qui, heureusement, sont des practitioners et des théoriciens en même temps des thèmes économiques de la Méditerranée. Donc, je salue Hakim Ben Hamouda, Georges Giovanetti, Yahya Zubir et Lara Bikhaïdi. Après tant d'années de travail ensemble, c'est une très belle occasion. Je salue surtout aussi Luis Oscar Moreno, qui est déjà avec nous au ministère espagnol des Affaires extérieures, que je vois au fond de son image, malgré que je te dis, Luis, que tu as la fenêtre derrière toi. Alors donc, c'est difficile à voir ta vraie image. Maintenant, c'est mieux. Merci. Et donc, et je salue évidemment, bien spécialement, notre ami Hakim El Ayoui, qui est le président du Policy Center for the New South au Maroc. Comme je disais, et je termine par là, ce webinaire devait être un vrai séminaire, une vraie conférence qui aurait dû avoir place au Maroc ces dernières semaines. Mais donc, nous avons dû le transformer en événement un peu plus court parce que les webinaires ne peuvent pas durer toute une journée ou une journée et demie. Et pour le faire plus intensif avec nos participants d'aujourd'hui. Et donc, Hakim, j'espère qu'on aura l'occasion d'avoir la vraie rencontre fructueuse que nous avions prévue le long des mois suivants quand les événements présentiels puissent prendre place de nouveau. Merci donc pour l'hospitalité que le Centre marocain for the New South nous avait offert. Nous en sommes fiers d'être confrères, d'être associés à ces démarches pour la Méditerranée occidentale, à la coopération euro-méditerranéenne tout large, mais plus spécifiquement à la coopération avec nos amis marocains et les autres amis de la Méditerranée occidentale, au nord comme au sud. Et donc, sans plus m'attarder, je passe donc la parole à Karim El Ayoui. Comme vous le savez, il est le président du Policy Center for the New South au Maroc. Après une très, très longue et fructueuse carrière impressionnante pour la jeunesse qu'il a, à la Banque mondiale, à la Banque centrale du Maroc, à Maghreb, et maintenant à la tête de ce grand think tank marocain qui est devenu aujourd'hui son centre de recherche avec des capacités de pensée et de production intellectuelle et scientifique vraiment admirables. Alors, Karim, tu as la parole, s'il te plaît.
Muchos gracias, Senan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your nice words. Sorry, I had to disconnect the translation because it was echoing here. So, and thanks to, of course, our friends at IEMed, Roger, Giuseppe, and the other colleagues. We are glad that it is happening. As you said, we, of course, miss you, and we would have liked to be together physically. I guess it's still not possible, but we are hearing good news on the front of vaccines. So let's hope for the best. I will be very brief and also share with you maybe where we stand in terms of our reflection here in Morocco, and particularly at the Policy Center, and what I hear from colleagues, not only my personal thoughts, but also from colleagues at other think tanks and the mood in general in the Mediterranean, as our seminar is focused on I would say Western Mediterranean, la Méditerranée occidentale. The first message maybe is that macroeconomic policy has been under strain. COVID basically response, which was a sanitary, health response, created a recession, but it's a self-inflicted recession because it's because of the policies to contain COVID that we had a recession, particularly in the hard month of for Morocco, for instance, but also for neighboring country, March, April and May, and a little bit of June with then a recovery, and the second wave now in the making, although the measures are less strict. Basically, it engineered the recession. I can give you the number that the estimates we have here at the Policy Center for Morocco. It's basically 3 percentage points of GDP per month of confinement. So we lost about 9 percentage points of GDP as compared to a normal baseline scenario, if you wish. So that's a very strong shock. But similar to the kind of shock you have in Europe, and particularly, on the Mediterranean side of Europe, France and Italy and Spain, which is what I've seen from numbers, which is quite close. So basically, fiscal policy at work, huge pressure on budgets, and a little bit less on monetary policy on this side of the Mediterranean, a very active response on the European side of the Mediterranean with the European Central Bank and innovative instruments, more quantitative easing, and of course, interesting response with the sort of mutualization of debt for the first time in Europe, which is, I think, an achievement, and a big recovery program that is being implemented by country, but mutualization of the debt. Debt has increased also on this side of the Mediterranean, and the fiscal response has put strength on budget, and the social safety nets have to be put in place quickly. What we have discovered, basically, and I'm speaking for Morocco, and Hakim can complement for Tunisia later on, and other speakers on other countries of the region. What we have discovered basically is an important solidarity. I'm an economist, but it's important also to have a political view of this kind of crisis. And I think they have reflected also the status of internal fronts in countries. Division, polarization, elections, parties, etc. It's very important. And I think in Morocco, there was a very strong response and strong solidarity that translated really clearly on a solidarity fund that reached about, a little bit more than 3 percentage points of GDP, which is not negligible. It's a big amount of, it's something to be noted. And actually today, and I invite you to consult our website, we are publishing a study where we had done surveys on 3 points of time over time. So the first one, I think, was in May, and the second one in June, and the third one in September. So 3 waves of surveys of population and the trusts in institutions, etc. And we are publishing this today. I think it's already online. It's not, I think, it's already online. Very interesting. And trust over time has remained sort of trust in the institution, the capacity, the response in Morocco has been quite strong, with a very strong fiscal response again, and the putting together social safety net. And I think many countries have done more or less the same. Our monetary policies have been more timid, less for quantitative easing, less ventures. Larabi would say something on that. Not experimenting with sort of original and heterodox instruments like you can find in other emerging countries, although for the first time in history, actually, and I stand to be corrected, many emerging countries have sort of experimented new tools of monetary policies, particularly large emerging economies like, Turkey and Brazil and others, sort of venturing in quantitative easing, buying, private debt and assets on the central bank balance sheet and stuff like that. We have not seen this on this side of the Mediterranean. We remain quite orthodox on the monetary policy side, while the fiscal has been absorbing the heat of the response. And of course, now we have more debt. Still sustainable for many countries of the regions, but starting to reach levels that are sort of in the range of being sort of not sustainable over the long run, depending on further shocks. So the sensibility, the vulnerability to additional shocks are still there. Let us not forget, dear friends, that we have never, in reality, fully recovered from the big financial crisis of the end of the 2000s. We have never fully recovered. And this is not to CNN and Spain that I will explain that. And Italy and particularly Europe, as we were less sort of affected by the financial crisis of 2008, but still affected by the global environment. So really, we have never really recovered. And that's my second sort of important message, which is the reform agenda remains ahead of us. And structural reforms, improving the quality of education, improving the business climate, growth enhancement measures, moving from a sort of, low value added, low wage, mid-skilled specialization in the international trade to something that is more innovative with higher research and innovation, etc. A more sort of sophisticated industrial policy remains now more than ever on the table. And I think the same goes for Europe, and particularly the Mediterranean country, the Western Mediterranean countries of Europe, where very important reforms are lying ahead in terms of improving across the board the quality of the education systems, improving, being more innovative, more flexible economies, reforming the public sector, sort of living up to the challenges of increased competition from China. Changing specialization, etc., etc. So I think the reform agenda is even more now sort of prescient than it was before COVID. But there are a couple of common challenges. I don't want to sound too gloomy, but there are common challenges and there are common responses. There are, of course, internal agenda and sort of domestic policy reforms in terms of those structural reforms. But I think there are a couple of sort of joint reforms or projects or sort of goals that we can share together. One is climate. And I think the EU has come up with a Green Deal, sort of a wish to plan, sort of a starting plan, sort of a vision to decarbonize massively its economies. And I think this is also for us something that, should be seen as an opportunity and a huge project and source of growth as well. And it goes from, of course, the production of goods and services, but also the direct production of energy from renewable resources. And I think there's a great potential of collaboration between and fully and integrating sort of energy markets, north and south of the Mediterranean, producing renewables energy out of electricity, out of solar and wind power, to green the energy mix in Europe and prepare for the post-oil world, which is much needed if we want to be serious about climate. It includes, of course, production of cars, electric cars, etc. So I think that's something that where there's a great potential of working together, and having a sort of common agenda of reform in terms of the general decarbonization of the economy. There are tough topics, of course, between us. Migration is one, but there are others in terms of security, terrorism, threats that should be put on the table. They will remain because also of internal opinions and the state of domestic opinions in Europe. That will remain tough topics over the medium term, I guess. Very difficult to deal with, but we still important to maintain dialogue. And this is where think tanks and networks, such as the one that IEMed is carrying, and with lots of competence and energy and enthusiasm, are very important. When times are difficult, it's even more important to discuss, to exchange with the values that are our values as think tanks: tolerance, open dialogue, relying on fact-based analysis, serious empirical work, with constant sort of dialogue and exchanges. So I think that more than ever, the type of work we are doing together, the networks we are trying to entertain, the openness, the values that are uniting us are very important. Let's not forget that our population, irrespective of the side of the Mediterranean, are asking for more protections. There's a general feeling of more risk, of an environment that carries uncertainty, that can affect the lives of families and individuals. And this demand for protection translates, of course, in political terms. I mentioned migration is one. They can translate in sort of negative effects in terms of rising populism, rising extreme movement, etc. I think it's our role as think tanks to keep sort of clear views and facts and an open channel for dialogue. So these are the words and the thoughts I wanted to share with you at this time. They are not necessarily my personal thought, but they are what I gather from discussions with colleagues, friends here in Morocco, but also with others doing the same kind of work and being partners all around the Mediterranean. So thank you for this opportunity again to join you today.
So thank you very much, Karim. We are fortunate to have you not only the president of your center, but very much experienced economist for this occasion, because of your long experience at the World Bank in Washington and at the Banque Centrale Al Maghrib in Morocco. So that helps a lot to get the views from the south and from Morocco. Well, and I would say all the more because our friend Omar Al-Makbar is not feeling well today, or well, he will not be able to join us, but we received really a good input of ideas from Morocco already with Karim, and this will continue with the rest of our speakers. But I welcome especially Luis Oscar Moreno, who's the Director General of Economic Diplomacy. He is as well a long date experienced high civil servant in the Spanish diplomatic service and commercial service. He's not only an experienced Director General and economist, but he has been posted as the head of the Spanish commercial and economic office in Rabat. So he knows very well the ropes which we are talking today. And so, Luis Oscar, thank you very much, really, for being with us. Thank you especially for being the representative of the Spanish ministry. So I thank especially the ministry, who I let you know is one of our patrons. So all the most. Thank you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Florenza. It's a great pleasure being here today and being introduced by you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm really glad that I'm here with you and with old friends. I'm watching here, and I can see Roger. I can see also the the economic professor Monsieur Jaidi, with whom I've also passed many nights of discussions at the embassy in Spain. Well, I won't dwell on my past adventures in Morocco, which where I spent 5 years, from 2014 to 2011, 2019, and I'm going to take the floor to just talk about what opportunities the region we understand has, and also how the context affects the economic context affects the regions, and how the region can seize the opportunities that right now we think there are for the region, and in particular in regards to global value chains. If you allow me, I'm going to share a presentation. I think it's going to work. Here you go. Can you all see it? I think you can. Well, first of all, let me introduce the global value chains tendencies. There's been a shortening of GVCs, as you all know. Since 1990 to 2010, there was a production fragmentations that allowed for GVC's deployment. Basically, China and others came to the world economy, and that allowed for cheap labor that flooded the markets, and that led to diversification of value chains and fragmentation of production. Also, this shortening of global value chains was intensified with the trade war between China and the US since 2018 and 2019, excuse me. And at the same time, there's been a global chains asymmetry with a great extension of the value chain, of the Chinese value chain in Europe, and not as much reciprocal in China. After COVID, there's been a disintegration and a nearshoring demands, because countries have understood that there's been an excessive concentration, supply tensions, and now companies are balancing efficiency with supply assurance and response flexibility. This has accentuated a tendency of shortening of value chains, making them less complex and less concentrated. And also services has also demanded more proximity. Trading services demanded more proximity for value chains. So we've seen some regionalization of value chains. There are some hub and spokes, USA and Mexico, Germany and Eastern countries, and Spain or France with the Southern neighborhood, in particular in sectors like automotive sector, textile sector, but others too. So after this, so what we're seeing with these tendencies, we've seen as an effect a decreasing participation of the US and the EU in global value chains and the appearance of localization. We've seen that the US and the European Union have seen a lesser weight of intermediate goods in third countries export, and the US as a response has initiated a decoupling from the Chinese value chain. And how can the EU improve its relative position in GVCs? Well, there's a new policy, a new model, which is called open strategic autonomy, which is interesting because it's going to probably to reinforce reshoring, but at the same time, it's going to reinforce nearshoring. And that's what's interesting for the region. In the latest papers from the Commission, we've seen how the southern border, the southern production border, wants to be included in this diversification of value chains, this nearshoring of production. So there's an example of what has going on between the EU and Morocco in industrial goods after the FTA that was set in place in 2012. This has developed the Spanish-Moroccan value chain, which has been very strong in the auto sector and the textile sector, and that has made Spain the first trading partner of Morocco in the last 5 to 6 years. And this regional value chain that, as I'm explaining, I think it fits with a new context, with a new global value chain context, a new trade context. we can show what its pattern of specialization is. And it looks very similar to the NAFTA integration model, same sectors, auto sector, textile sector, same regions, northern regions, being Mexico or being them in Morocco, and same specialization pattern, which means that basically Spain has specialized in exporting inputs, and at the same time, Morocco has specialized in exporting outputs. So a part of the value, the EU Spanish-Moroccan value chain has meant that there is a fragmentation of production and there's a specialization patterns related to the competitive advantage of each country. And that has more than doubled trade figures between Morocco and Spain. And this doubling of the figures is absolutely correlated to the development of this value chain, a value chain that can be taken to its full potential if we do things properly at the southern and northern borders of the Mediterranean. So the context is gives us an opportunity in order to put the focus in the southern region as a production frontier, like what happened between Germany and the eastern countries in the 2000s. In the 2000s, we can also try to foster this value chain as having the example of what has been done with the Spanish-Moroccan value chain, but also could be extended to other countries. And this could fit this economic context that demands more proximity in value chains, more diversification of value chains, more less concentration in certain suppliers. And this, as I say, can fit this opportunity for the Maghreb region and the Southern European region. Here we have some examples of how Morocco, with Renault and PSA, has produced more than 400,000 cars per year. And this model, is extremely linked to the development of FTAs and free trade zones. And this model has allowed for Morocco being one of the first car producers in Africa, after South Africa, depending what kind of models you analyze. And at the same time, it has allowed for a boost in trade between the northern and southern part of the Mediterranean, particularly Spain and Morocco. But also Tunisia is the second component exporter, car component exporter in Africa. So that's also, we have also an opportunity also for the expansion of this production frontier in the southern region. This fragmentation of production in relation to each country's competitive advantage between the northern and the southern region of the Mediterranean, and also being one of the top 10 cable suppliers to the EU market, allows, as I mentioned, for an expansion of the production frontier in the southern region. In the case of Algeria, we're talking about final goods markets, but there's still a Volkswagen assembly plant. And as I'm saying, if the proper policies are set in place, we have an opportunity at the southern region and northern region of the Mediterranean to develop this industrial hub that, as I say, is able to adapt to this new model of nearshoring, of proximity of value chains. So can the open strategic autonomy strategy in the EU translate into reinforced nearshoring with the southern region? I think this is a great opportunity of really developing an industrial model with the southern region. DCFTA negotiations, value chain integrations. We want to see a replication of the industrial integration model that we've seen in the 90s and the 2000s with other regions of Europe. Services outsourcing also is an opportunity, brings new opportunities. Casa nearshore, Tetuan shore. There have been experiences of services outsourcing, which actually, with the digitalization in Europe, also there are companies that demand digital skills. digital skills at the competitive cost. And also that means that countries need to upgrade their digital skills and their digital infrastructure investment, but the opportunity is there because cost plus investment in digital infrastructure, and we have models as cash and nearshore, which have attracted FDI, can be also a source of production fragmentation with goods and with services. And at the same time, one last point, which I think is interesting, is that shorter supply chains bring together efficiency, climate change, and security demands. So there's a lesser less carbon footprint with shorter value chains between the southern and northern region of the Mediterranean than with companies that have very long value chains, which have a very high carbon footprint. We've seen some Spanish companies as Mango that recently announced that they were deviating their supply chain from China to Morocco and Turkey. So there are opportunities in this nearshoring demands related to excessive concentration concerns, disruption of stock concerns, disruption of supply chain concerns, and also at the same time, it meets this shorter supply chains can also meet the climate change goals, because shorter value chains have shorter, lesser carbon footprint. What threats to these opportunities that can be seized by the region? Obviously, one are protectionist tendencies, sovereignty renunciation, or even carbon taxes that may be set in place. But for this, it's very important to set up common standards at both the region, the northern part and the southern part of the Mediterranean regions, in order to have these common standards that may allow for GVCs, global value chains, or value chains that are able to set common standards, that are able to have a less of a carbon footprint, and that are able also to have more flexibility, because shorter value chains can adapt and readapt when disruption comes more easily. So this is the framework that I wanted to explain. I just wanted to mention the opportunities that this change of context, change of economic context brings to the region. Of course, that's going to demand reforms and policies that are going in the right direction in order to seize the opportunities to adapt to these industrial tendencies, industrial fragmentation that can work between the northern and the southern regions of the Mediterranean. So this is basically what I wanted to talk today, what I wanted to explain, what I wanted to show, and I would like to. I'm very open to questions if there are around this presentation, and I just thank you very much. Thank you very much, the IEMed and the Ambassador Florenza, for the opportunity of showing this presentation that just exposes the key points of how we analyze, how we see the opportunities for the region in the next years. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, Director General, querido Luis Oscar. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's been very complete. It is clear that, as it happened with Karim, you are not only a Director General, but you are a profound knowledge of the issue because of all your professional experience. So thank you very much for being with us. This is the first part of this webinar, which is this kind of institutional introduction. So our audience will be sending their comments or their questions, etc. And at the end, we will have a round table. So maybe they are not prepared at this point to put questions to you. But I promise, if we receive specifically for you, I will send them to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, and if you are with us all the time, although I recognize that probably you have other obligations pressing too, and we do not want at the same time to retain you with us all the time, but really, thank you very much. It's been very useful, very instructive, your presentation. And now, with your permission, I will pass the floor to the Roger Albiñana, who is, is the Director for Economic and Regional Affairs here in the Institute for the Mediterranean, who will conduct the round table that will follow this first part of introductory keynote speeches. Thank you, Luis Oscar, and Roger, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you also to Luis Oscar and also to Karim for their inspiring speeches and messages. In fact, I'm delighted to moderate this online seminar with so many prominent experts, our dear panelists, which I will present to you right away. I would also like to express my gratitude, as Ambassador Florenza already did, to the Policy Center for the New South for their invaluable support when organizing this event. For the IEMed and particularly the Medthink 5+5 network that we coordinate, the Policy Center is one of our closest allies in the Mediterranean region. And I must admit that it's so easy to work with them and at the same time so rewarding. On 22nd of October this year, so only 3 weeks ago, ministers of foreign affairs of the 10 countries of the Western Mediterranean convened in a ministerial conference with the aim to reaffirm its attachment to the cooperation in the area of the 5+5 dialogue. Next year, Spain will take over the rotating Northern co-presidency of the 5+5 dialogue, and we in IEMed are more than excited to contribute to this process through the Medthink 5+5 network. And we do it at a crossroads with lots of uncertainties in the horizon, as it has been already said. With the COVID crisis, interdependencies in the Western Mediterranean have accelerated in a number of fronts. The unprecedented economic crisis as a result of lockdowns and restrictions over the economic activity, this self-inflicted recession that Karim was referring to, requires a more coordinated collective response. We need to use every possible dose of multilateral and regional cooperation to pursue this collective response, because both states and societies have tremendously weakened in the struggle against this global pandemic. All the countries in the region have deployed an array of health, fiscal, monetary, and financial policies to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. First and foremost, fiscal policy has been used to soften the blow to households and businesses, while fiscal packages in the region, including off-budget measures, have been significant, both in terms of revenue measures, but also in terms of spending measures. Many governments have provided subsidized loans to SMEs, businesses in hard-hit sectors and low-income households. The fiscal support in several cases, however, did not translate into a fiscal impulse, as countries also introduced offsetting revenue and expenditure measures. This set of measures aimed at compensating the effects of an economic crisis that is impacting over millions of people in the region will be followed by recovery plans that have been announced by almost all the governments in the Western Mediterranean. For the governments of the north of the Mediterranean Sea, these recovery plans will be intrinsically linked with the deployment of the multi-billion Next Generation EU plan. But one of the questions that I'm asking myself, and that I will revert to our dear panelists today, is to what extent this set of plans will be used to boost sustainable and inclusive growth in the region, for which we are so desperate in need of, especially in this part of the world. Is really this post-COVID era a turning point that goes beyond the rhetoric of greening the economy? Because I clearly see some contradictions between the urgency by governments to take care of certain immediate necessary measures and some mid to longer term reforms that are crucial to transform our economic model. Finally, there is always the question of how can the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, and specifically the 5+5 dialogue, provide concrete solutions to meet the challenges of the post-COVID-19 economic recovery and contribute to achieve a more sustainable growth. To answer to these questions and to many others, I'm very pleased to introduce you our first panelist today, Hakim Ben Hamouda. Dr. Ben Hamouda has a PhD in international economics and teaches regularly economic development with several universities. He was the Minister of Economy and Finance of Tunisia. Before being appointed minister in January 2014, he served as a special advisor of the President of the African Development Bank from 2011 to 2014. And he was also director of the Institute of Training and Technical Cooperation within the WTO from 2008 to 2011. Dr. Ben Hamouda, vous avez la parole. Vous prenez l'écran.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Roger. I would like to take also the opportunity to thank IEMed, to thank my good friend Sinan and of course my friend Karim for the invitation and for the opportunity. I would like also to thank our Director General for an excellent presentation. And I think this, I'm going to talk about a little bit about Tunisia and then probably go to the cooperation within the Mediterranean space. I think in Tunisia, as Karim mentioned before, I think the situation probably because of the economic transition, in fact, started in Tunisia since 2011, since the Arab Spring. I think the situation, the economic situation was more complicated and more difficult. Of course, with a huge political dimension of renewal of institutions, elections, instability, and that contributed a lot, I think, into the actual situation. But from the economic side, I think the situation we are going through today, I think it's really the result of three main crises. The first crisis is, as Karim was mentioning, in fact, and this is the same crisis I think all the South Mediterranean countries are going through, is really the end and the failure of the old development model based on low-cost labor since the 70s. And I think the need, as probably Mr. Director General mentioned, in fact, the need to move for a new division of labor and new kind of integration. And I hope and I think that the crisis and the pandemic is going, and the crisis of the globalization since 2008 and the difficulties, the war, the trade war, is going to open a new era of economic cooperation between the north and the south of the Mediterranean. The second element is the macroeconomic stability, the crisis of the macro. So this is the first one, is more a structural crisis. The second one is really the macroeconomic crisis starting in 2011. I mean, Tunisia, like Morocco and like other countries, was in fact was really putting in place a quite very prudent macroeconomic framework, budgetary policy, at the same time monetary policy. This translated itself into a stable macroeconomic situation until 2011, but at the same with of course low inflation rate, with low debt situation. But the other side of the coin is that this stable macroeconomic situation didn't allow, in fact, the government to do major public investment, especially in the regions, in the interior region, and translated itself, in fact, in huge instability and huge difficulties. So this is after the revolution, I think we tried to move to a new macroeconomic framework with a more expansionary budget policy, with an important, part of public investment from one side. And also we tried to put in place a very expansionary also monetary policy. This translated, itself, and this new framework was able, in fact, to stabilize some growth, some level of growth. But at the same time, in fact, the result of this was a huge deficit, a huge increase of deficit, inflationary, trends in the economy, etc. So this is the second part of the crisis, dealing with the macroeconomic crisis. And the third, of course, is the hit, in fact, of the pandemic. This is the third economic crisis and its impact on the economic situation of the country, with with a major impact. We almost the same thing as Karim was mentioning. We probably, the crisis, the level of the recession, this is the most strong and difficult recession Tunisia is going to go through. We are expecting by the end of the year, the level of the recession is minus between 8 and 9% of growth. This is for the first time in the modern history of Tunisia, and including, in fact, 2011 with the revolution, with the level of growth, the recession was minus 1.9, less than 2%. Now we are experiencing, in fact, minus almost between 8 and 9%. More likely is going to be 9%, minus 9%. So this is really the economic situation, is the difficulties of managing the structural, in fact, difficulties and challenges of the economy. Add to it, in fact, the macroeconomic destabilization, and of course the impact of the pandemic. What we try to do, in fact, as all the southern countries try to do, is try to put in place, in fact, a fiscal response. I mean, the fiscal policy was used. The monetary policy, although we saw some inflection, but as Karim also was mentioning, for the case of Morocco, it stayed more conservative. And the idea was to use the budget policy, the budgetary policy, in fact, and the government spending, in fact, to support the private firms, to give safety nets, etc. So I think just to conclude on this, I think that what we are seeing, the Tunisian government is trying, in fact, to negotiate with the parliament a new finance law for the Loi de Finances Rectificative for 2020. I think is going to be a very, very, very tough situation. And this could be really a source of huge and major instability, political instability in Tunisia. The first draft of the finance law was rejected by the finance committee of the parliament. I think there is a new round of negotiation and discussion. This is for 2020. 2021 is going to be a more complicated situation. And this allow me to move, Roger, with your permission, quickly to the the theme of our discussion and debate. I think probably in Europe, I think we were looking and following, in fact, and I had the opportunity to discuss all these all the responses with Her Excellency Arantxa González, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, during her visit to Tunis a few weeks ago. But I think we are following And we are interested, of course, as a policymaker, but also as an economist, on what Europe is doing and the efforts and the innovations, in fact, from an economic policy side, European institutions and European governments are putting in place. And of course, we are excited about it as economists, but also at the same time as policymakers. Probably what is missing in all these discussions and exchange, etc. What is missing is really the regional dimension between Europe and the south of the Mediterranean. In fact, on how to help the government in the south to address the challenge of these economic crises. I would suggest two areas. I hope, and probably as think tanks, we should probably push for an initiative of a new cooperation north and south in the post-COVID era. And I think in my mind, we have probably two levels of this cooperation. The first one is what exactly is the Director General was mentioning. In fact, is the structural one. How could we benefit from the thinking of really putting and trying, in fact, to reorganize the global value chain on a regional basis. And this could be probably an era of thinking and also actions between the European institution, European government, the South government, but also I think more importantly is the private sector, because it's the private sector who is going to lead this process through agreement, through cooperation, and the examples you gave, Mr. Director General, about the cables in Tunisia and the car industry in Morocco are quite interesting. In fact, we could add to it, in fact, the aeronautic, although the aviation sector is going through a crisis, but we could add to it as successes is the kind of cooperation between North and South, in fact, in the aviation sector. This is the first area of thinking. Probably we could, in this new initiative for cooperation between North and South, structural one. I think the second one is really a financial one. There is, as Karim was mentioning, from the South, there is a lot of difficulties. There is a lot of challenges. And I thought I sent some proposals, and I thought we could think about, new innovative. We could probably think about some kind of debt, not cancellation, but bilateral debt reporting to the South, for example, for 2021, to give a room of maneuver for the government in the South, in fact, to invest and to address the crisis. We could also think about other initiatives. I think we could probably extend the guarantee put in place by the Commission and the Central Bank to some southern countries like Morocco and Tunisia under certain conditions, because I think that the budget support provided by the EU to our country will be not enough. This is a budget support for normal times. We are going through a exceptional times, and we need really an exceptional support. So these are the two areas. In my conclusion, I think we are, of course, going through the difficulties. The North has more room of maneuver, stronger institution, more solid institution to support, in fact, the recovery plans. These we don't have these possibilities in the South, and I think it's time to build, probably for us as Medthink, an initiative to really to put on the table the need for a new initiative from Europe to support and for a cooperation, in fact, between the North and the South. For exceptional times, we need exceptional agreement of cooperation between North and South, in fact, to make sure that our future, we build together our future, including after the COVID. And I think this is, Karim maybe may support me and the colleagues from Morocco. I think this for the population, because Karim was talking about, you know, sometimes it's the confidence, and I think, and sometimes, in fact, lack of confidence between the North and the South, you know, linked to the, how to call the migration and other areas. I think strong support from the North to the South in this complicated moment, I think will probably make a change and will be a game changer in the perception and the confidence between our populations in the North and the South. I was too long. I was not planning to be that long. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benhamouda. We took very good note of your very interesting proposals. There are few ideas here and there, but specifically on the first one that you talk about on the need to regionalize global value chains and pursue these nearshoring of industrial production. I think that our next speaker will be able to speak at length, because our next speaker is Giorgia Giovannetti, and Dr. Giovannetti, she's a full professor of economics at the University of Florence since 2001 and visiting professor at the European University Institute, where she acts as scientific director. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Cambridge and has held position at the Universities of Cambridge, Rome, and Casino. Giorgia, you have the screen.
Roger, and Giorgia, with your permission.
Please go ahead. Go ahead. Feel free.
What I suggest for Medthink is to put in place, in fact, a committee of 10 colleagues and try to translate, if I mean there is an agreement on the need to have a new initiative, and you know, to translate this into how to call it a little note we could probably, as think tanks, as Medthink, address to the different government, but also at the same time to the Commission. Thank you. Sorry.
Excellent. No, I take good note of that, and we will certainly discuss it internally, and we'll definitely come back to you with a proposal. Promised. Giorgia, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Roger. I will share my screen because I'm speaking about global value chain and regional value chain, and exactly like the Director General Moreno, I will show some slides. So basically, can you see it? The one thing I want to say is that the COVID crisis is very, very different from the previous crisis. So also the way out have to be different. Now, what are the main differences between the COVID-19 crisis and, for instance, the financial crisis? Well, first of all, there is a very different sectoral composition of the shock, because the impact of the COVID crisis has been much more on services, which are usually the less trade-intensive sectors, while the previous crises were much more stronger on manufacturing. The services were sort of protected. The role of finance has been completely different. The finance was at the origin of the financial crisis, while instead is sort of protecting somehow the economies, at least in the north, but also in the south, with plans. So it's giving money for countries in the COVID crisis. Now, what I will do is I will focus on some of the Med5, because I will try to provide some data for what I'm saying. Mainly, I will take some example for Italy, and I will speak also about Morocco and Tunisia. And first, how they've been affected with difference with the financial crisis, and then what can be the way out, according to my opinion. So, sorry. This is just to see that if you look at the global value chain participation, here I'm speaking about the global value chain. So in the world, not the regional one, which I will speak about afterwards. Here we did some plot of a lot of countries, about 60 countries, in the crisis, in the financial crisis, with the rate of growth of GDP on the y-axis and the GVC participation. And here, countries which were more in the GVC were much more affected than countries now with the COVID. So basically, the GDP and the COVID and the GDP and the global value chain participation are less correlated in the COVID crisis than they were in the financial crisis. And this is true also if you look at just the Med. This is Med 5+4 because it was very difficult to get the data for Libya, especially on GVC participation. So basically, this is without the Libya data. But basically, you have that the countries which are, there is a negative correlation with the participation and the growth forecast of the IMF for 2020, but is much less strong than in the previous crisis. Now, I want to show you interesting data for Italy, and I think this could be a nice thing if we could do it also for other countries. This is some data that the Bank of Italy has done, and they looked at the impact on firms and the impact. So basically, there were some questionnaire on firms done at the financial crisis and then now in 2020, in September 2020, asking how many firms had suffered of losses of turnover bigger than 4%. This actually, by the way, is also the World Bank has done a very similar survey, and very similar results come out from the World Bank enterprise surveys. So basically what you have is that the percentage of firms which have turnover losses during the financial crisis, 40% of hotel and restaurant had the turnover loss bigger than 4%, while in the COVID crisis, the hotel and restaurant, about 90%, and this was up to September, right, before the second wave, had a loss of turnover which was above the 4%. And here you see that countries which are, sectors which are to the left are the sectors which are not much involved in the GVC output. So hotel and restaurant, wholesale and retail trade, other services, they're not very involved into global value chain, while the mechanical, textile, engineering are. So this, I think, is an interesting result, which make us basically support the idea that the sectors which have been affected by this crisis are different sectors which are not used to be affected by crisis. So my first lesson is each stock has its peculiarity, and the policies should account for this. And I think this is what all the previous speakers have said. So the COVID has badly affected all the countries with different impact at the sectoral level. Tourism, transport, hotel and restaurant, all the services have been more affected this time with respect to previous crises. Now, in the countries of the Southern Shore, and in this case, out of the country we're looking at, also Libya and Algeria, there was also the oil and gas shock. So it was a twin shock, the COVID plus the oil. So they've been even affected more in a worse way than the others. Now, of course, different Western Mediterranean countries have taken measures to return to a path of economic growth and employment. And one thing that I want to discuss now is whether the regional global value chain can play a role. So the idea is that what are the regional value chain? How do they differ from global value chain? Both of them imply complex production, relation between firms which are operating in different countries. The difference is that the regional value chain are geographically closer. And all these international related activities, the offshoring, the trade of intermediates, bring about efficiency gains. And most people before me have already mentioned that. But they also imply higher international interconnectedness and possibly higher exposure to shocks. So did the current shock imply relocation and reshoring? Are the 5+5 potential candidates for nearshoring, for instance, as compared to Asian countries? If yes, in which sectors? What can make them better than other countries? I will show you some data, and I think some data, again, for Italian firms are interesting. Again, from the Bank of Italy survey, there was a question that is your firm, as your firm closed down one or more plants abroad, in the last 3 years, or do you intend to do it in the next year? On average, only 2% of internationalized Italian firms reshore production or plan to do it in the next year. So it's very, very little. Now, if you want to look at in different sectors, textile and mechanics, for instance, in textile, the percentage is higher than in mechanics. So more textile firms have thought about reshoring or nearshoring or closing down plants than mechanics, for instance. The same question can be asked on the input side. About 80% of firms in Italy, out of the internationalized firms, did not reduce the number of foreign suppliers. Only 3.4% of firms substituted foreign suppliers with domestic suppliers. And again, if you look at it in terms of sectors, you see that the story is similar in the two main specialization sectors, but in terms of number, again, for the mechanics, reconfiguring the supplier base may be more costly because assets are more specifics. So there may be more people in textile, about 7.5% are considering of doing it in the next year, sort of changing the provider of intermediate inputs, while basically no one, 2% in mechanics. Now let's see, for instance, textile was one of these sectors where Italian firms, for instance, would like to reshore or nearshore. If you look at the comparative advantage, countries like Tunisia and Morocco have revealed comparative advantages in textile. And these revealed comparative advantages, for instance, for Tunisia increased over time. It's different, the situation, if you look, for instance, at the pharmaceutical products. There is very, very little, basically there is no revealed comparative advantages in Tunisia and Morocco as far as pharmaceutical products are concerned. However, if you look at attractiveness matrix, it's true that some of you mentioned that we should change the model. We should not look at the labor cost or labor saving for nearshoring or global value chain, but it's also true that firms still look at the cost side. And in any case, if you compare Tunisia and Morocco with China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh, to say 3 countries where a lot of European firms are offshoring at the moment or are into global value chain, that most of these countries are very involved in global value chain. If you look at that, the Tunisia and Morocco are actually attractive. They are attractive because of the early cost, the cost of labor, because of the output per worker, because of the distance very much, because of the agreement with you, and because of the GOC integration. So they are attractive. And if you want to wrap up a second, basically, we can say that the world has changed after COVID. Trade has been badly affected. We know that GDP has decreased dramatically. You were mentioning, I think 9% for Tunisia and Morocco as decrease of the GDP for this year. Italy and Spain are the worst with minus 12, 13% in the last IMF forecast. Policy is changing. Just think of Europe. The intervention of Europe with respect to the financial crisis has been much faster to a certain extent, but also the policy which is being forecast is a different type of policy. It's true we are still waiting for it, but I think that the next generation is a good example of a new policy. I do believe that we should increase cooperation between the North and the South Shore and between the 5 and 5, and that opportunities exist. Especially if countries in the South Shore can join or increase their participation in regional value chain. Morocco and Tunisia are attractive. Some people think that global value chain may increase vulnerability and speak about reshoring. But for the example of Italy, but I've also looked at the World Bank Enterprise Survey that they have about 18 countries for which they asked the same question. I could not summarize them in a table. The same question that the Bank of Italy asked to Italian firms. Basically, there is no support out of the 18 countries for which the World Bank has done the follow-up COVID crisis survey for reshoring, but there is support for nearshoring. And I believe that the regional value chain can be a way out, can even be a way to protect the economy from shocks, and especially if we look at it in terms of North-South cooperation. So I really support the creation of really regional value chain, also on the ground of environmental consideration. And some of these things have been already said by the previous speakers. Now, at the sectoral level, I think that I showed the example of textile sector. Textile sector is where a lot of countries, both in the north and the south of the Mediterranean, have historically comparative advantage, but the demand for textile is not very high at the world level. Even so, I think they might benefit from reshoring, and they may increase export at the intensive margin. On terms of pharmaceutical, well, certainly there is no comparative advantage in the countries of the southern shore, while there is comparative advantage, for instance, in Italy. I think still there is a room for a regional value chain, especially for sharing of knowledge, for knowledge transfer and sharing of know-how and standard. And I think this could actually increase the export at the extensive margin. So I will stop here. And
thank you very much, Professor Giovannetti, for being so clear. I think you, to wrap up, you said that there is not an established trend towards reshoring or even nearshoring, but there are opportunities, and of course, governments, and not only governments, but also the private sector should try to exploit these opportunities. Of course, as we know, the reshoring rhetoric began to emerge very strongly when outgoing, hopefully, President Donald Trump actually put it on the table. Now we will see if there will be also changes in the rhetoric trends, at least for the reshoring. But in any case, here in the Mediterranean, the nearshoring option would be beneficial option for both shores of the Mediterranean.
I mean, what I think is that the reshoring is something on which all the media jump in, and is very much the basis of populism. The idea that I will protect jobs in my country because I sort of facilitate reshoring. That's the kind of line. So that's why I think that the data on the survey of the Bank of Italy, these firms are a lot, because the sample is 4,500 Italian firms, out of which 600 are internationalized firms. So it's 600 firms that answer those questions. The fact that is 3% firms that have either reshored or are thinking of reshoring, I think is a very small number given the crisis of COVID. This was done after the first wave, so in September 2020. On the other hand, I do believe that there are a lot of advantages in splitting, fragmenting the production into individual tasks, and therefore the nearshoring could be very good. Could be good for geographical reason, could be good to integrate more the countries and grow more, and could be also good because the economic cycle between our 5 countries in the north and the 5 countries in the south is actually not correlated. Because of raw materials, because of different structures, and so on and so forth. So we could even gain from the reshoring because we can have different cycles. So I do believe very much that regional value chain with countries in the southern shore of Mediterranean make a lot of sense.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We move to our next speaker, who is Dr. Yahya Zubir, who is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Doha Center and a senior professor of international studies and director of research in geopolitics at Ketch Business School in Marseille, in France. Prior to joining Ketch in 2005, Dr. Zubir taught at multiple universities in the US and was a visiting faculty member at various universities. I will not mention all the countries, but mainly from Asia. Dr. Zubir, the screen is yours. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I know. I was talking to myself for a while. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Florenza, and it was a pleasure seeing him again, as well as you, Roger, for the kind invitation. I believe I'm the only non-economist in the team here, And being among the last, many of my colleagues have said quite a few things I wanted to say. But I think I will focus a little bit on this COVID-19. And I would say that some of the few things that one should take into consideration is that the pattern that you would observe in the Maghreb is something that also happened in the rest of the MENA region. If you look at any of those countries, and I think that the Maghreb countries, they had difficulty. Some of you mentioned the financial crisis, and the fallout of that crisis was still ongoing. And Minister Berhamo had already laid out some of the issues. But the COVID-19 has exacerbated, I think, the problems that exist, and it did in fact reveal some of the shortcomings that are occurring. And I think before we talk about the post-COVID, we need to talk about the lingering problems that have been going on. There was we had the Arab uprisings. I don't call it the Arab Spring, but the Arab uprisings and what caused them. I think that the root causes of that are still present. What the COVID-19 revealed was that it put into question the ability of the governments to absorb shocks, whether environmental, global, or societal, and I focused quite a bit on the Maghreb countries, looking at what happened during COVID and how they handled it. While they handled it relatively well in terms of doing what the other European countries have done, or some others, and sometimes like Tunisia did even better than some of the European countries. There's no question about that. But it revealed the inadequacy of the investment in the social services. I'm very much focused on development from below, sustainable development, and all that. And so there is, it's still the weak capacities to deliver the core functions. The questions of governance are still on the agenda here because of the highly centralized and poorly digitalized, situation in the region, and you can see it in this, north-south, fracture, the digital one. Besides this fragmentation, I also see that the social protection is not there, especially among the vulnerable groups and the youth, the refugees. They were all exposed to the COVID pandemic, and you see again this widening gap between the rich and the poor, even in terms of access to medical care. And I think unless we address these issues, we will face again political and social, this political and social demands, from the young population and so on. The post-COVID situation, and I repeat this, I emphasize this, will bring just the very same. If there is one thing that is interesting, of course, is the fact that this crisis could be an opportunity if it is well exploited by the governments in place. I will say a few things about Algeria simply because I had my colleagues talk about Tunisia and Morocco. But again, other issues, non-economic issues, I think are fundamental to address. Corruption. We have seen on what happened recently with the Hirak in Algeria and other places. I mean, there's no one immune in this whole MENA region. This issue of corruption, as well as the economic conditions, of course, but the political trust that has in some places has been tenuous between governments and the rules and the ruled and the rulers. So the impact, I think that my colleagues have talked about it. The impact has been horrendous. The number of jobs, the number of bankruptcies, and so on. This will lead us to think about the aftermath of this COVID-19. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that the region hosts some of the largest concentrations of misery and despair. And it goes all the way, eastwards as well. And we're talking Libya and beyond. Look at what's happening in Lebanon and so on and so forth. But here we're talking about the Western Mediterranean. So I'll stick to the Maghreb. So, we have to think about the fallout in terms of the remittances that have happened, the lack of foreign direct investment. Who is going to come? How? When? Is Europe going to be able to contribute to the re-emergence or to the renewal of the situation? Because once we do the diagnosis of the region, we realize how difficult, how challenging the situation is going to be. In terms of funding, the first speakers here talked about the necessity of reform. We have been talking about reform in the Maghreb for many, many years, and these reforms are not coming. And now we look at, if we're talking about the 5+5 or the southern ones, the 5 in the south, you have, 2 countries like Algeria and Libya that are suffering from the double issue, a political crisis, and the drop in the oil, in the price of oil, which is resulting in some serious issues. So the whole regional political landscape, has shifted in terms of social movements, focusing on the lack of welfare provision, again, because this is compounded by the COVID-19, the social inequality that has remained in place, the use of authoritarian measures that still exist, including during the confinement period, what has been used. So it remains to be seen what will happen in the post-COVID period, and what will come. I'm not going to talk about what has happened in terms of what, we have talked about confinement and all, but we have to talk about, what the restrictions have produced, what they have brought about, in terms of, Mr. Benhamou is here, maybe he could, I have some figures about the number of jobs that have been lost in Tunisia, for instance, in the tourism industry, including in Morocco as well. And these are jobs that are lost. I mean, they are in the hundreds of thousands, and you have small businesses, hotels, and so on, and they have gone, and also in the area of agriculture, which sometimes depends on the climatic conditions and so on. So these are, doing the diagnosis of the whole situation is one thing. Now, I would say a few words just as a case study in Algeria, for instance, and one thing that what the crisis revealed is the lack of investment in the health sector. For instance, this was not just like, a surprise, but there's again, the others were not much better, but in Algeria, I think it was quite surprising in terms of, since there was big investment in infrastructure and elsewhere, but the health sector had been neglected. So this was one of the prise de conscience, if you wish, where the governments woke up and there was no way of hiding the reality of this lack of investment in human security. I'm a big fan of the concept of human security, and if you want to have a productive economy and so on and so forth, you have to first take care of your own population and providing the necessary services, including the ones in the health sector and whatnot. So, and one other positive within the crisis is that the rentierism can no longer survive. You cannot keep an economy relying solely on the hydrocarbons income. And so basically, if we were to believe the reaction of the authorities in Algeria, is that this time, at least, they are willing seriously to shift gears and to focus more on the productive economy than relying on the oil revenue, on the rent. So that is one of the positive things. And there was, I think somebody else had mentioned the notion of solidarity that had emerged in the country, for instance. Another one is identifying the various sectors where there are better possibilities. We have seen in a short period of time during the crisis where small businesses, focusing on producing masks and so on, which gives hope that there could be, we have those SMEs being able to work even with universities, and they produce locally. And I think it happened in Morocco as well, where locally they produce, medical equipment and so on and so forth. So I would not, I know that we are limited by time, so I think I would just mention a few, perhaps some recommendations.
2 minutes, please.
Yes. So one of the things, of course, is institutional reforms based on accountability. I think we have to go back to basics in terms of development and more sustainable economies. How to do things to basically renew the trust between the governments and their citizens. Again, this time, since you're talking about the future, where are you going to borrow money? Now, for instance, Algeria said, I would not borrow from the international financial institutions. So you try to guess where they're trying to get it from, whether it's going to be China or what have you. But if you go to the IMF, I think the IMF is becoming a little bit more stringent now in terms of, wanting to know where the money is going. And these regimes or these governments cannot go even to the Gulf countries, because the Gulf countries themselves now are cutting, in terms of their budgets and so on and so forth. So I think that the only opportunity the only solution for the Maghreb countries is to have this kind of, reforms, institutional reforms, and greater cooperation with the North, but on, much more sensible conditions. There are places that could be attractive in terms of renewable energy, solar energy, and so on and so forth. And I think if these governments, act in a responsible way, there is a possibility of basically restarting the economies on better footing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zubir. You actually touched upon very important subjects. You said, well, I'm not an economist, but the subjects you touch upon have a clear impact into the economic development of any country. Topics like which relate to good governance, fight against corruption. Well, you actually said something which actually captured my attention. You said rentierism can no longer survive. Well, we have been saying that for the last 10 years. And we will see if the countries that are actually concerned will finally start diversifying their economies. Let's hope for that, because that would be the best measure they could actually undertake. We move to our last speaker, our dear Laravi Jaidi. But before, let me remind you that you can send your questions. I'm starting to receive lots of questions. I don't know how I will handle this last part of our webinar today, because of course we have limited time. But I'll do my best. You can send your questions via the chat or via the function of questions within the Zoom program. And for those who are watching us from YouTube, you can also send us the questions from there. So then we move to our last speaker. We are very pleased and honored to introduce a close ally from IEMed and from Medthink 5+5, Dr. Laravi Jaidi, who is a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, where he focuses on international economy, social development, international relations, and Mediterranean studies. Dr. Jaidi is also a member of Morocco's Special Commission on the Development Model, headed by Morocco's ambassador to France, and he's a former professor at the Mohammed V University in Rabat. Dr. Jaidi, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Merci Roger. Je vais me permettre de parler en français pour être un peu plus fluide dans la présentation.
Allez-y, c'est parfait.
Et je remercie mes amis de l'IEMed de m'avoir invité au nom du Policy Center, dont je suis membre, pour participer à ce débat qui est extrêmement intéressant, à la fois pour le regard que l'on porte au nord et au sud sur cette crise et sur notre volonté de sortir et de cette crise et de renforcer nos solidarités. Je vais mettre l'accent sur deux aspects, ou trois plus exactement. Un sur où nous en sommes aujourd'hui dans les politiques de relance, qui appellent évidemment à apporter des réponses de longue durée à la situation de la crise. Et quelles sont les réformes qui sont appelées à se mettre en œuvre dans nos pays respectifs, notamment dans les pays du sud de la Méditerranée occidentale, et qu'est-ce qu'il faut attendre de l'interrelation, l'interdépendance entre le nord et le sud de la Méditerranée dans la prise en charge évidemment de cette situation complexe. Mais tout d'abord, je voudrais insister même très rapidement sur ce que cette crise a mis en évidence. Elle a mis en évidence nos fragilités au nord et au sud, nos vulnérabilités, aussi peut-être les failles de nos modèles de développement, pas tout simplement de nos modèles de production et de consommation, mais surtout au sud aussi de nos modèles institutionnels et dans les rapports entre l'État et la société d'une certaine manière. Et si aujourd'hui il y a tout un débat sur comment aller vers plus de proximité pour assurer, si ce n'est pas une souveraineté, du moins une plus grande autonomie de nos pays du Sud par rapport à la mondialisation, il y a en même temps cette question claire qui se pose qu'aucun pays ne peut sortir seul de la crise. Les interdépendances sont là, il faudrait les renforcer dans l'intérêt évidemment de nos citoyens. Voilà donc quelques évidences, à mon avis, que nous partageons tous. Partant de cela, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire ressortir de la réponse à la crise, aussi bien à court terme qu'à long terme qu'ont connu enfin nos pays? Il y a eu un premier moment, disons, il y a des temporalités différentes, comme vous le savez, dans la réponse à la crise. La temporalité de l'urgence, la temporalité d'aujourd'hui, celle du court terme, et la temporalité du moyen et de long terme. Et il faut évidemment bâtir sur les réponses positives de l'urgence des actions ou des mesures de court terme qui permettent véritablement de consolider l'économie et de donner plus de cohésion sociale face à cette crise et d'aspirer à faire évidemment des politiques à moyen et long terme qui puissent aller dans le sens d'un développement durable et d'un développement solidaire. Le temps de l'urgence, il y a eu dans nos pays, notamment au sud, des réponses fortes et des réponses parfois convergentes aussi. C'est vrai qu'entre le nord et le sud, il y a des situations différentes face à la vulnérabilité que j'évoquais tout à l'heure. Peut-être le nord a été beaucoup plus vulnérable humainement parce que le Covid a touché plus d'effectifs de population, alors que au sud, la vulnérabilité peut être beaucoup plus économique dans la mesure où il y a un manque à gagner de la ressource dans des situations où déjà nos économies étaient fragiles en tant que telles. Et c'est pour cela qu'aujourd'hui, au-delà de la réponse de l'urgence qui a été faite il y a quelques mois, nous sommes toujours dans une situation d'incertitude. Les seules certitudes que nous avons, c'est que le coût économique de cette crise est extrêmement élevé chez nous, comme dans les pays du Nord. La seule peut-être certitude, c'est que le coût social est très significatif au Nord comme au Sud, en termes de perte d'emploi, en termes aussi de santé économique du citoyen. Et la seule certitude aussi, c'est que nous allons boucler 2020 avec des croissances négatives un peu partout, à des taux très différents. Par contre, les incertitudes restent toujours présentes. Les incertitudes sont celles de la sortie du confinement, déconfinement, de stop and go que nous connaissons. Nous ne savons pas si nous sommes dans une deuxième phase ou si c'est la première phase qui est continue, etc. Et donc, c'est une difficulté de maîtriser la situation sanitaire en tant que telle et donc ses répercussions économiques et sociales. Et cette incertitude va se traduire en termes de quoi? En termes d'incertitude sur nos capacités de dépenses publiques pour faire face à cette situation, d'investissement public. Et nos capacités peut-être même d'épargne nationale pour mobiliser nos ressources endogènes. Et notre capacité à s'endetter et jusqu'à quel seuil, disons, à l'avenir. Et donc aussi pour les pays du Sud, une grande incertitude, c'est celle de la demande externe qui est adressée à nos pays, que ce soit une demande en termes de ressources nationales, de ressources naturelles pour le pétrole, par exemple pour l'Algérie, ou de demande de tourisme pour nos pays respectifs, Tunisie et Maroc, ou de nos demandes pour les questions de produits agricoles ou de produits industriels. Donc voilà un peu cette réalité et cette complexité. Et si évidemment il y a eu des plans de court terme un peu dans l'ensemble de nos pays qui avaient pour objectif dans un premier temps à la fois d'amortir le choc social et de préserver l'appareil de production en soutenant les entreprises, cette situation ne peut pas durer longtemps. Il faut quelque chose de plus fort. Il faut aller vers stimuler l'offre, stimuler la demande. Et évidemment, nous sommes tous d'accord qu'il faudrait sortir des paradigmes classiques, des règles budgétaires à court terme, jouer sur peut-être la politique monétaire beaucoup plus flexible. Il y a eu des relâchements de la politique monétaire pour assurer des liquidités massives à l'ensemble des entreprises. Il y a aussi une situation d'assouplir les composantes de la gestion prudentielle dans le système bancaire, tout en étant dans la recherche de la stabilité financière, parce qu'il faut garantir un financement qui viendrait aussi du secteur bancaire, pas tout simplement de l'État. Et en même temps, et surtout, parce que nous allons faire face à une situation extrêmement délicate, qui est celle des dettes publiques et privées. Les dettes publiques et privées. La dette va grimper, elle est en train de monter de manière très forte, mais nous ne savons pas dans quel état les entreprises vont sortir de cette crise. Il y aura des dettes privées qu'il s'agit de traiter, et de le traiter peut-être de manière différente. On ne peut pas continuer à financer l'entreprise uniquement pour l'exploitation. Peut-être faut-il renforcer leur capital, etc., etc. Donc voilà, quelles sont les difficultés qui se posent aujourd'hui. Donc par conséquent, il y a des questions au-delà de la gestion macroéconomique sur laquelle je reviendrai tout à l'heure sur le plan de relance, quels sont les objectifs que doivent ou que sont en train de mettre en place les politiques publiques dans nos pays respectifs pour ces plans de relance. quels que soient les montants qui sont mobilisés. Et nous n'avons pas les ressources suffisantes peut-être pour mobiliser les financements adéquats. Je donne un exemple tout simplement. Entre le budget de relance de la Mauritanie qui est de l'ordre de 700 millions d'euros, comparez-le avec le plan de relance de la France, je ne dirais pas de l'Europe, qui est de 100 milliards d'euros. Et vous avez enfin la différence de volume. Évidemment, les pays ne sont pas du même poids, ni de population, ni économique, mais ça vous donne quand même la différence entre la capacité des pays du Nord de mobiliser de la ressource. Chaque pays en soi est dans un cadre aujourd'hui mutualisé à l'échelle de l'Europe, et nos pays qui sont encore dans une situation individuelle avec leurs maigres ressources. Donc, les enjeux de ces plans de ressources sont les mêmes. Un, comment reconstruire les économies et relancer la croissance. Relancer la croissance, cela veut dire tout simplement, comme je disais tout à l'heure, soutenir les capacités des entreprises qui sont dans une situation délicate. Au-delà, disons, enfin, de leur trésorerie, parce qu'il y a un risque de basculement d'une crise financière de liquidité de ces entreprises à une crise de solvabilité de ces entreprises. Voilà donc enfin le jeu important. Et en même temps, soutenir aussi la croissance par la dépense publique. Or, nos budgets sont sous contrainte. On l'a dit, les ressources endogènes vont se ralentir parce que l'effet de la récession de PIB va se sentir l'année prochaine et non pas cette année en termes de recettes de l'État. Et la capacité d'endettement, nous avons déjà, au-delà de l'Algérie, nous avons en Tunisie, au Maroc et en Mauritanie aussi atteint déjà des seuils qui sont assez importants. Donc, par conséquent, il faut réfléchir comment améliorer nos capacités de ressources internes tout en gardant la marge, évidemment, d'emprunt à l'extérieur. Et surtout, que le budget de l'État ne peut pas prendre en charge tout l'investissement public. Les établissements publics ont un rôle important dans nos pays. Nos établissements publics ont un rôle important dans l'investissement public parce qu'ils participent en général, en moyenne, à 2/3 de l'investissement public en général. Et ces établissements publics, ça dépend de leur santé financière. Il y a certaines qui sont dans une bonne santé, d'autres qui sont dans une très mauvaise situation financière. Donc, comment coupler aussi la réforme de ces établissements publics pour leur donner plus de capacité de participer à l'investissement public. Pourquoi j'insiste sur l'investissement public? Parce que l'investissement privé, quelle que soit son importance dans un certain nombre de pays du Sud, comme la Tunisie ou le Maroc notamment, il est étroitement lié à la capacité de la dépense publique et de l'investissement public. Il est dans le relais. Il est présent dans un certain nombre d'activités, oui, mais le montant et la tendance de l'investissement privé est étroitement liée à la capacité de dépense de l'État. Et en même temps, il faut soutenir aussi la demande des ménages. Nous l'avons soutenu à un certain moment comme aide sociale et transfert monétaire. Est-ce que nos budgets vont avoir cette capacité de soutenir la demande des ménages par des aides sociales dans une économie où l'informel est important? Ça ne peut pas durer longtemps. Il y a évidemment toute une réflexion, cette fois-ci, sur la question de la cohésion sociale dans une situation de crise. C'est le deuxième volet des enjeux de ces plans de relance. Atténuer les vulnérabilités, des programmes locaux de développement, locaux d'emploi. Pour le Maroc, par exemple, élargir la couverture médicale, c'est ce qu'il est en train de faire, qui va peser, qui va coûter énormément, peut-être avec des contributions des concernés, mais il y a évidemment cette question de la vulnérabilité sociale à prendre en charge, en partie par le budget, en partie par les ménages eux-mêmes. Et en même temps, la vulnérabilité ne touche pas que les personnes, elle touche parfois des territoires. Nos territoires sont dans des situations très différentes face à cette crise, dans leur capacité de ressources endogènes. Il y a des territoires qui sont branchés, je dirais, dans la dynamique de la croissance et vis-à-vis du reste du monde. Il y a des territoires qui sont enclavés, des territoires qui sont fermés sur eux-mêmes. Et il s'agit évidemment de traiter ces territoires. Et donc, par conséquent, il faut qu'on ait cette cartographie de l'état des lieux au niveau territorial pour que l'on touche véritablement les citoyens dans ces espaces de vie, d'une certaine manière. Troisième enjeu, c'est celui des enjeux sectoriels. Les enjeux sectoriels sont extrêmement importants parce que tous les secteurs ont été touchés par la crise, mais il y a certains plus que d'autres. Dans nos pays comme la Tunisie et le Maroc, c'est évidemment le tourisme. Dans la Mauritanie, c'est la question de la pêche. En Algérie, c'est la question du pétrole et de ses dérivés, d'une certaine manière. Donc la relance doit être aussi une relance qui prend en considération l'état de situation des crises et l'état des situations des crises sectorielles différenciées et la capacité des secteurs à rebondir plus rapidement que d'autres dans cette situation. Donc nous avons besoin, pas tout simplement d'un plan de relance global, mais de plans sectoriels qui l'accompagnent d'une certaine manière, c'est ce qui est en train de faire. Au-delà enfin de ces questions, de plan de relance, la question c'est comment faire. Comment faire, c'est-à-dire comment construire les bonnes réponses de politique publique. On ne peut là. Aujourd'hui, la policy mix devient presque un impératif. Utiliser l'endettement, oui, c'est possible, tout en traitant la dette publique et la dette privée, héritée de la crise, mais desserrer la contrainte budgétaire, par un arbitrage plus efficient de l'allocation de la dépense. Nous sommes dans une situation de crise, il faut donc être très soucieux de là où l'on met l'argent pour relancer l'économie. Nos économies ou nos pays sont habitués à des dépenses de gaspillage, à dépenser plus plutôt qu'à dépenser mieux. Aujourd'hui, ils doivent dépenser mieux plutôt que de dépenser plus, j'allais dire, d'une certaine manière. Et donc, par conséquent, réfléchir aussi à une policy mix par une politique monétaire qui soit active, qui met l'accent sur une plus grande souplesse de la politique monétaire dans la logique de l'indépendance des banques centrales. Il ne s'agit pas de faire tourner la planche à billets, il s'agit de trouver des mécanismes de financement qui ne gênent pas la capacité du système financier à mobiliser la ressource pour l'entreprise, mais qui permet au budget de se financer par des titres, par la monétisation d'un certain nombre de titres. Ça, c'est évidemment la flexibilité à introduire dans la politique monétaire, tout en prêtant attention à la politique de taux de change qui soit plus flexible qu'elle est ordinairement. Au-delà de ces questions de policy mixte, que l'on retrouve dans tous nos pays comme étant des questions clés, n'oublions pas une chose, que la véritable sortie ne peut être appuyé, soutenu que par les réformes, par le soutien aux réformes structurelles. Il ne faudrait pas que la réforme soit la victime collatérale de la Covid. Parce que souvent, dans des situations de crise, la réforme coûte, elle doit être financée. Et on a évidemment des difficultés à accélérer une réforme dans des situations de crise. Pourtant, c'est la réforme qui est la voie, je dirais, du salut. Il faut donc chercher à mettre en place des réformes qui soient qualitatives, permettant de mieux utiliser la ressource. Et c'est là, disons, enfin, la démarche est extrêmement importante parce qu'il ne s'agit pas tout simplement de saisir des opportunités sectorielles ou des opportunités de financement, mais il s'agit surtout, à mon avis, de manière très importante, de combattre la rente économique, de combattre les positions dominantes pour que l'économie soit plus ouverte, pour aller vers une vision intégrée de la dépense globalisée, pour aller vers une réduction de la marge de déperdition de l'argent et surtout pour aller vers une territorialisation de la dépense et de l'action publique. Une territorialisation, c'est-à-dire faire participer les collectivités territoriales à la mobilisation de leurs ressources endogènes et en même temps à une meilleure définition de leurs priorités. Et donc, nos suivis, évaluation des politiques publiques devient un des enjeux les plus importants. Tout cela nécessite quoi? Nécessite un capital de confiance à renforcer, nécessite un nouveau contrat social pratiquement dans nos pays, parce que la crise ne peut être combattue que dans une meilleure relation, un meilleur rapport entre l'État et la société. Si nous n'établissons pas ce cadre de confiance et si nous n'établissons pas ce contrat social, il y aura évidemment des situations de difficulté à mobiliser, à s'approprier, je dirais, les objectifs de la relance. Dernier point que je voudrais souligner, c'est quid dans la relation entre le Nord et le Sud pour nous sortir de cette situation. Je disais au début que la vulnérabilité nous concerne tous, à des degrés différents ou dans des situations différentes. Mais l'avenir est un avenir commun. Et je mentionnerai tout simplement les 4 ou 5 points qui me paraissent aujourd'hui importants pour réfléchir à l'interrelation, au renforcement de l'interrelation dans le cadre de ce, disons, de la Méditerranée 5+5 pour sortir de la crise. Premier domaine, c'est celui de la sécurité sanitaire et de la santé. Il y a des choses à faire ensemble. Nous savons très bien que nous deux, nous avons vécu péniblement cette situation en termes d'infrastructures, de ressources humaines, d'accès aux médicaments, d'accès enfin aux biens médicaux, etc. Ça doit nous appeler à réfléchir comment mettre en relation au mieux nos ressources pour une réponse sanitaire, notamment sur les produits des biens médicaux et les biens et l'industrie pharmaceutique. Cette question du nearshoring, elle ne se pose pas uniquement pour l'industrie automobile ou l'industrie aérospatiale, comme on a l'occasion de le dire souvent, mais sur un volet comme ça, comme l'industrie pharmaceutique, il y a des fenêtres d'opportunités extrêmement importantes pour lesquelles enfin, on pourrait discuter enfin, sur cet aspect-là. Comme pour la question de la formation médicale. Ça paraît assez absurde que les pays du Sud financent la formation pour l'encadrement médical enfin, des pays du Nord, comme vous le savez. Et donc, par conséquent, il y a une situation à prendre en charge de manière sérieuse et visible sur cet aspect-là. Deuxième domaine, c'est celui de l'énergie ou du développement durable ou de l'écologie. Le Green Deal, il est là. L'Europe a annoncé évidemment enfin, ses grandes orientations, ses moyens qui sont déployés, etc. C'est une bonne chose. Il ne faudrait pas évidemment que le Green Deal se transforme en une barrière à l'entrée de nos produits dans le marché européen à travers évidemment enfin, les niveaux de la décarbonisation, tout en appuyant les politiques du Sud pour aller vers une décarbonisation et aller vers des politiques d'adaptation énergétique. Il y a une matière à refaire revivre l'accord de Paris dans ce qu'il avait de fondement dans les relations Nord-Sud, aussi bien pour l'accès au financement climat que sur les choses. J'ai bien peur qu'aujourd'hui, avec justement ce manque de ressources ou cette contrainte de la ressource, tout ce qui a été fait dans nos pays du Sud, notamment dans les énergies renouvelables, soit non pas remis en cause, mais disons son rythme soit ralenti. Alors que les énergies renouvelables dans les pays du Sud deviennent enfin l'axe fondamental à partir duquel on peut produire autrement, on peut consommer autrement et s'inscrire dans la logique de l'accord de Paris.
L'Arabie,
oui.
Excusez-moi, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Troisième domaine, c'est les chaînes de valeur. Je ne vais pas m'étaler là-dessus. Tout à l'heure, ça a été évoqué par mon ami Moreno, auquel enfin, j'adhère à son analyse. Il y a cette réflexion enfin, sur les chaînes de valeur régionales à construire, notamment enfin, dans des secteurs comme enfin, l'automobile ou comme enfin, l'aérospatiale ou l'agriculture. Même si l'agriculture, on va vers beaucoup plus une approche en termes d'agriculture de proximité. Autre domaine, c'est celui du numérique. On évoque beaucoup la question du numérique comme étant le vecteur de sortie de la crise parce qu'il promet beaucoup de changements à la fois technologiques et beaucoup d'opportunités. Mais le numérique n'est pas tout simplement la capacité d'utilisation des technologies d'information. C'est le contenu à donner à ces technologies d'information. Et là, sur le contenu, les pays du Sud doivent aller beaucoup plus vers une appropriation évidemment des enjeux enfin, de ce contenu, dans le cadre d'un dialogue avec l'Europe, qui elle-même cherche une forme de souveraineté du numérique, donc à construire une souveraineté numérique collective face évidemment aux enjeux que pose l'accès aux technologies d'information, que pose au big data au niveau international. La mobilité, ça a été évoqué tout à l'heure, on peut bien se cacher la figure, mais elle est là. Elle restera toujours posée la question de la migration, peut-être demain de manière beaucoup plus vive qu'aujourd'hui. Et donc, il faudrait enfin des réponses qui sortent un peu des sentiers battus et qui vont dans le sens à la fois de la régulation de la migration illégale, mais qui permet aussi d'améliorer enfin les mobilités des compétences entre les pays enfin, du Nord et les pays du Sud. Et la question du financement qui a été abordée tout à l'heure, sachant que l'Europe ne peut pas mobiliser sur ses ressources internes pour l'aide aux pays du Sud, allons vers la recherche de financement innovant en mobilisant enfin, les capacités du marché des capitaux internationaux par des formules de garantie ou autres. Voilà enfin donc la réponse. Et je conclurai en disant une chose fondamentale, il faut qu'on ait confiance en nous, Méditerranéens, de notre capacité de trouver les réponses à cette situation de crise. C'est cela, la solidarité réelle, et je pense que la Méditerranée et la région doit prouver sa solidarité en renforçant ses institutions à la fois nationales et ses institutions internationales dans le sens d'un meilleur rapport entre l'État et la société et d'un meilleur rapport entre le Nord et le Sud dans la mobilité humaine. Merci.
Merci, professeur. I mean, it was a perfect speech to wrap it up, and you basically laid down all the priorities that the recovery path has to encompass and has to envisage in the coming months. Unfortunately, we have very little time left, and there are a few questions, so I will not speak any longer, and I will simply ask you whether there are 2 questions here, and I have like 3 questions that were sent to me, so we will focus on the 2 questions that you can all read if you open the box of questions and answers. There is, il y a une question de Luke Schillings. Quelles mesures protectionnistes ont été prises et nous devons attendre à d'autres mesures? Quel secteur? And then there is a second question by Batul on Algeria. So perhaps this